The fall Victoria Clark was the kind of woman others envied. Beautiful, impeccably dressed, always gracing magazine covers at charity galas, or dazzling on Richard's arm at A-list events. Her days were filled with brunches at Soho House, fittings at designer boutiques on Rodeo Drive, and charity luncheons where her smile seemed effortlessly genuine. To the outside world, Victoria embodied the American dream: perfect marriage, wealth beyond measure, and a life draped in luxury beneath the golden California sun. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. It started subtly, a shift in Richard's gaze. The late-night business calls that ran hours past midnight, his perfunctory affection replaced by expensive makeup gifts and dismissive reassurances. Victoria tried to ignore the whispers she heard at country club dinners, rumors about Richard's infidelity, his wandering eye, and the elusive it girl seen leaving his private office after hours. One bright morning, as sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their opulent Beverly Hills mansion, Victoria's world began to unravel. She found a diamond earring, one she'd never worn, tucked between the cushions of the living room sofa. The scent of an unfamiliar perfume lingered faintly in the air. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to act normal, hoping it was all some misunderstanding. Days later, during an executive luncheon held in their marble-tiled garden, Victoria noticed Richard's arm lingering a little too long around a young, strikingly beautiful model named Lila Monroe. The exchange of glances, the too friendly laughter, Victoria could no longer deny what everyone else seemed to know. That night, she confronted Richard, but he brushed her off coldly, his face a mask of indifference. "Don't start with your paranoia, Vic. You're making a scene," he said. And as he walked out of the room, a chill settled deep within her bones. The final blow came unexpectedly. Richard summoned her to his sleek home office, papers neatly stacked on a glass table. "Just a few documents to sign, darling. Routine updates for our investments," he assured her. Distracted by a phone call from the housekeeper and desperate to maintain the last shreds of normalcy, Victoria signed what he placed before her. Within days, the truth hit with the force of a wrecking ball. The documents had transferred all jointly held assets, real estate, investment accounts, even the house,
Almost done.
to corporate entities
Hurry.
solely controlled by Richard. Victoria's name vanished from property deeds. Her credit cards declined at her favorite cafe, and her legal counsel, longtime friends of her husband, refused to take her calls. Richard had not only deceived her, he had systematically erased her from the life they had built together. The betrayal did not end there. Lila, now installed as Richard's public companion, arrived at the estate under the guise of helping Victoria pack her things. Security guards, men Victoria had known for years, blocked her access to the bedroom and strong-armed her out the front door as Richard watched impassively from the balcony. Paparazzi, tipped off in advance, snapped photos as Victoria, once queen of the manor, stood in shock at the edge of her own driveway, her world reduced to a single suitcase. Utterly humiliated and stripped of everything she thought was secure, Victoria felt the eyes of Los Angeles on her, not with admiration, but with a vulture's hunger for scandal. The lights of her former mansion twinkled coldly behind her as she walked away, each step echoing with the collapse of a life that, until that moment, had seemed unshakable. In the silence that followed, Victoria realized that wealth and beauty alone could not shield her from betrayal, or from the cold, calculated ambition of those closest to her. And in that silence, a seed of something new, a flicker of rage and the beginning of resolve started to grow. Rock-bottom Victoria had always imagined that, should her world collapse, she would rage, break something, or at least be able to cry. But in the days that followed her public humiliation, she felt emptied out, like a house stripped of everything valuable. She drifted through her new existence in a haze, her senses dulled by disbelief. Gone were the flutes of vintage champagne and the velvet touch of designer dresses. Instead, she faced mornings in a cramped, unfamiliar apartment. Her name not on the lease, her savings inaccessible either by legal sabotage or overnight betrayal. Her new reality was harsh in its ordinariness. The apartment, a short-term rental found in desperation, smelled faintly of bleach and someone else's cigarettes. Where once she awoke to the sprawling view of downtown Los Angeles from a king-size bed, now she opened her eyes to peeling wallpaper and the hum of traffic just outside her window. She spent the first few mornings staring at the ceiling, paralyzed by a sense of helplessness she'd never known before. The media circus was merciless. Tabloids splashed her fall from grace across their front pages. Trophy wife dumped, Victoria Clark's downfall, while online forums buzzed with speculation and schadenfreude. Former friends, once eager to bask in her glow at parties and luncheons, vanished from her life, or, worse, joined the chorus of gossip. Victoria's phone rang only with calls from unknown numbers, reporters, private investigators, or scam artists who smelled opportunity in her vulnerability. Every attempt to reach out to old friends or confidants was met with polite distance or direct rejection. As the weeks dragged on, the shock gave way to something more suffocating. Shame. Victoria found herself hesitant to go outside, fearful that someone might recognize her from the tabloids. In the privacy of her apartment, she studied herself in the bathroom mirror, a woman hollowed out and aging overnight.
I really did.
Her eyes,
But some days,
once bright and
it feels like
spirited,
it just
had
happened
lost
yesterday.
their luster. The lines around her mouth, never noticed before, now seemed permanent, etched by disappointment rather than laughter. Money, or rather the lack thereof, became her fiercest jailer. She was forced to pawn the last of her luxury jewelry to pay for groceries and bus fare. She clipped coupons, something she'd only seen in movies, and learned the cheapest days to do laundry at the coin-operated machines down the hall. She rationed food, skipped meals, and wrapped herself in an old robe for warmth when the heating failed. The mundaneness of survival, the counting of pennies, the searching for loose change in couch cushions, made her understand a world she'd never seen from her Beverly Hills perch. At her lowest, Victoria considered defeat. She curled up on the threadbare couch late at night, the glow of the city mocking her as she thought, maybe this is what I deserve for loving wrong, for being blind, for mistaking comfort for happiness. The thought flickered, tempting.
I see it.
But something inside her, some tiny,
here.
stubborn ember, refused to let her surrender. One particularly gray afternoon, as rain blurred the city outside, Victoria heard a knock. It was Amy Rosen, the one friend who hadn't turned away. A brilliant attorney with sharp eyes and a reputation for integrity, Amy entered without ceremony, bearing takeout Thai food and a bottle of cheap but decent wine. They ate in silence for a while. As dusk deepened, Amy finally spoke, her tone low and steady. Something in Amy's unsentimental faith stung more than pity would have. It peeled back the numbness, forced Victoria to confront a truth. Rage and pain could be catalysts if she let them. Amy outlined her plan, ways to prevent Richard from further damaging her reputation, how to document his abuses for a possible legal fight ahead, and, most importantly, how to reclaim a sense of agency. She told Victoria to start documenting everything.
They know where I am.
Every memory of
I don't have much
manipulation,
time.
every
The drive is under the
correspondence,
mattress.
financial
Please hurry.
statement, or piece of proof that could one day become a weapon. That conversation was Victoria's turning point. In the weeks that followed, she made an uneasy peace with her anger, allowing it to fuel late-night research on divorce law, personal branding, and the business of second chances. She began to sketch out who she would be, should be, when she re-entered the world on her own terms. But before resurrection, she had to face the ashes. She took time, days, then weeks, to grieve who she'd been. She allowed herself to mourn the marriage, the friendships, the lost years. She scribbled angry notes in a dollar store journal, wrote unsent letters to Richard, filled with fury and clarity. Alone in that tiny apartment, Victoria let herself break so she could begin to rebuild. Not as the woman he had shaped, but as the woman she would choose to become. Metamorphosis, the months that followed, were a crucible,
No, just the carry-on.
burning
Is
away
the flight still
every
on schedule?
trace of the woman
Yes, you're all
Victoria
set.
used to be. She moved through them alone, quietly, her resolve growing incrementally sharper with each day that she survived. No one in the city knew her now, not truly. The anonymity, once humiliating, became a kind of armor. It started, as change so often does, with small acts of defiance against despair. Victoria forced herself into routines, as much for survival as for sanity. Updating her resume, practicing new smiles in the mirror, tidying up her tiny apartment after each sleepless night. But she understood, deep down, that true transformation would require more than grit. It would take reinvention. One night, unable to sleep, Victoria scrolled through her old social media accounts, watching herself flicker and fade across the digital landscape of the past decade. Each photo was its own lie. A trophy wife's practiced grin, designer labels, hands resting perfectly on Richard's arm. She began to research. What made a reputation? Could a life be remade as carefully as an appearance? Determined to reclaim control over her own narrative, Victoria started with what she could change: her appearance. She consulted quietly with one of Hollywood's most discreet surgeons, an older woman, Dr. Evelyn Rowe, who had built her reputation on transforming the desperate into the desired. In a series of late-night appointments, Victoria explained what she wanted: subtle, strategic alterations. Nothing grotesque, nothing that screamed plastic surgery, but just enough to make her features sharper, fresher, less recognizable to those who had known her as Victoria Clark. The procedures were grueling. There were weeks of bruising, swelling, and the impossible itch of healing skin. She avoided mirrors, except to check her progress, watching her old face recede, replaced gradually by that of a stranger. One who looked determined, more angular and modern, with eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. But altering her face was just the beginning.
Everything.
Victoria transformed her wardrobe, discarding every piece that belonged to her old life. She traded couture for smart, minimalist pieces. Sleek pantsuits, tailored dresses, low heels that carried her briskly through Los Angeles without a hint of fragility. She dyed her honey blonde hair a deep mahogany, learned how to do her own makeup in understated, sophisticated tones. Reinventing herself demanded more than cosmetic changes. Victoria became a student again. She registered under the name Veronica Hill for online courses in finance, marketing, and entrepreneurial management. Each night, her cramped apartment filled with the blue glow of her laptop screen as she devoured business case studies and trend analyses, dog-earing pages, and jotting down risks, advantages, and tactics that would have baffled the woman she once was. She went to networking events in Silver Lake, in Westwood, never in Beverly Hills. Not yet. There, she listened. More than she spoke, picking up the slang of young disruptors, learning what made a startup succeed where old money flopped. For the first time in years, Victoria felt her mind reawakening, hungry, focused, and shockingly capable. She found joy in the intellectual challenge, in looking at a market analysis and understanding where others might fail. At every coffee shop table, she was Veronica Hill, a name with no baggage, just endless possibility. Of course, the process was steeped in moments of fear and self-doubt. Sometimes she caught a glimpse of herself in a window reflection and flinched. Sometimes the mask would slip and Victoria would mourn for the comfort, the certainty, and the warmth of her lost life. But each time she wavered, she forced herself to remember Richard's blank, cold eyes as he watched her world collapse, and it stiffened her resolve. Slowly, through discipline and desperation, she crafted a new persona. Veronica Hill was nobody's cast-off trophy. She was sharp, ambitious, and relentless. At mixers and workshops, Veronica made quiet inroads with influential women, agents, publicists, designers, building a web of acquaintances that might, one day, become allies or assets. Her voice grew steadier. Her gaze became unflinching. The final symbolic act came when Victoria stood over her kitchen trash can, clutching her old driver's license and a stack of credit cards bearing her former name. One by one, she cut them up, watching the remnants of Victoria Clark tumble into darkness. She allowed herself a moment of nostalgia, then let it go. There would be no going back now. Emerging from her apartment the next morning, hair glossy and straight, a new briefcase in hand, Veronica Hill walked into the sunlight, not as a woman running from her past, but as someone willing to face any future she chose. The metamorphosis was complete, if still a bit raw. All that remained was to take her first bold step into the world that had so gleefully cast her out, determined to not only survive it, but ultimately bend it to her own unyielding will. New beginnings. Veronica Hill's first days in her new skin were shaped by uncertainty, but beneath the wariness, there pulsed a raw excitement. It was as if she had stepped into someone else's life. A woman with no past, no reputation to protect or destroy, no expectations except the ones she would write herself. On the surface, her transformation was dramatic. Beneath, it was still taking root, unfurling with each risk she dared to take. She rented a small, sunlit studio in a revitalized part of downtown Los Angeles. The neighborhood wasn't glamorous, but it was vibrant with ambition. Storefronts doubled as co-working spaces, and local coffee shops bustled with sharp-tongued entrepreneurs, mapping out billion-dollar dreams on napkins. For months, Veronica had been preparing for this moment, reviewing business plans, refining her pitch decks, analyzing competitors, and learning to see opportunity where others saw only closed doors. Now, it was time to finally step forward. Veronica's first venture wasn't just a business. It was a statement, one that would carve a space for her in a city notorious for remembering every rise and every fall. She chose the industry she knew best, fashion. But instead of old money couture or soulless fast fashion, her vision was bold and personal, an exclusive label merging sleek minimalism with sustainable production and technological innovation. The brand would reflect her own metamorphosis, classic but daring, refined but meant to disrupt. Early challenges and resilience. Launching a luxury label from scratch in Los Angeles required more than taste and drive. Veronica knew she lacked the resources and connections she once took for granted. so she approached each obstacle with the cool pragmatism she'd honed through hardship. She mapped her goals by the week, sourcing eco-friendly textiles, hiring local artisans, wrangling with city permits, and negotiating hard for every inch of studio space. Her apartment became her temporary command center, bolts of fabric stacked beside textbooks, prototypes pinned to the wall above a cluttered desk glowing with her laptop's blue light. She pitched her ideas at startup meetups and women in business breakfasts, always choosing circles far from the Beverly Hills elite who might recognize her voice or her posture. It was hard at first. The persistent self-doubt, the stinging rejections, the uphill battle for investment. She journaled after every setback, refusing to let bitterness take hold. Instead, she analyzed what went wrong, revised her presentations, and practiced until her new identity felt more like armor than a mask. Through online forums and small industry functions, Veronica began to build a network, not of society wives or inherited wealth, but of hustlers, visionaries, and self-made women. She reached out to small boutique owners from her old circles under her new name, pitching collaborations and pop-up events. Her product line, tailored blazers, sharp dresses, accessories with unexpected edges, slowly gained buzz in the city's younger, image-driven circles. A fateful encounter. By late spring, Veronica had secured her first boutique partnership, a capsule collection to debut in a stylish Silver Lake storefront. The launch event was modest but stylish. No paparazzi, no influencers paid to flaunt her designs, just customers, stylists, and curious creatives from LA's new money and hungry class. The mood in the room was electric, the kind of restless optimism Veronica had almost forgotten could exist. She felt tinges of nerves, but she refused to shrink back. She was Veronica, self-possessed and unknown. Toward the end of the evening, as she was pouring herself mineral water at the makeshift bar, Veronica's gaze snagged on two figures near the door. They were instantly familiar. Richard, still, immaculately dressed, the carefully tended stubble, the shallow gleam in his eyes, and at his side, Leela, radiant in scarlet and more magnetic than ever. For a breathless moment, Veronica's heart skittered, her body freezing with old fear. But something clicked. Neither of them recognized her. She watched as they circled the room, admired the displays, and chatted idly with patrons. They barely glanced her way, not even a flicker of suspicion in their eyes. The realization dawned slowly. She had truly become a stranger to them. More than relief, Veronica felt the exhilarating weight of power shift. No longer haunted, she was the invisible hand in the room, a presence, not a victim. Rather than avoid them, Veronica made a split-second decision. She approached, initiating conversation as if they were merely two other guests. Great turnout, isn't it? I'm Veronica Hill, one of the designers. Richard shook her hand with polite dismissal. Lila offered an indifferent smile. Their attention drifted quickly. They had no idea they'd just met the woman who'd once shared their home and secrets. The moment was brief, but it lit a fire inside her. She wasn't just rebuilding from nothing. She had stepped onto the board, ready to play. Strategic relationships and early risks. In the weeks that followed, Veronica took risks that scared her. She cold-emailed buyers, brokers, and style editors. Some never replied, but several, drawn in by the novelty and quiet buzz of her first showcase, agreed to coffee and interviews. She pushed herself to network, to brave rejection, to cultivate a new tribe of allies among the ambitious and overlooked. Veronica wasn't seeking shallow approval anymore. Every relationship was strategic. She made careful notes about
You can't just
people's
ignore what I'm
allegiances,
saying. I need you to
motives,
leave.
and patterns, the habits of those who might one day help or need something she could use. She also began investing, small but shrewdly, in promising startups run by women and
Please, answer the
minorities
phone. I need help.
in
He's
LA's
here.
tech and fashion scenes.
Everything all right?
She attended panels and pitch events, always as Veronica Hill, and took on the role of investor mentor for several fledgling businesswomen. The ripple effect was subtle but real. Word spread. Veronica was sharp, well-connected, and generous with guidance, so long as the recipient brought something substantial to the table: healing, growth, and hints of revenge. Late at night, Veronica sometimes allowed herself to reflect. Pain lingered, and some part of her would never forget what Richard and Lila had done. But the pain was now a motivating remnant, a reminder not to trust carelessly and to protect everything she built. She didn't seek out her old friends, nor did she scour society magazines for echoes of a life she'd left behind. She let the past simmer unattended, choosing instead to focus all her energy on the next phase. Still, moments of poetic justice teased at her mind. She began to learn, through her expanding network, of the small cracks forming in Richard's business empire. A lawsuit here, an unhappy investor there. Whispers of poor management
Okay.
she could subtly
Look, there's
encourage
something I need to
if
tell
she
you.
chose, but no part of
wasn't
her
entirely
plan
truthful
involved
before.
recklessness. For now, she proceeded carefully, documenting, observing, strengthening her foundation. A new chapter truly begins. By midsummer, Veronica stood in the front room of her modest apartment, reviewing invoices and
But that's
proposals,
exactly what I mean.
her
If we
clothing
don't
line
push
gaining
back now,
traction,
they'll keep
and her
doing
phone,
it. We have to make
once a source of
stand.
dread, now aglow with opportunity. Amy, ever her confidant and strongest support, came by often, sharing wine and war stories, reminding Veronica that courage could look like showing up one more time after everyone counted you out. The city outside had not changed, but Veronica had. She was ready finally to claim a place in the world on her own terms. The woman who had once been erased had learned to write herself back into existence, each bold step forward, erasing the old wounds and replacing them with the resilience and hunger of someone destined to seize, not just survive, her new beginnings. Game of revenge. As summer gave way to the golden haze of early fall, Veronica Hill watched Los Angeles spin on, sleek and superficial as ever. From her sunlit studio, she scanned spreadsheets and sketched designs, but her mind drifted to deeper, sharper matters, old grievances that refused to die quietly. The urge for vengeance was not a wild flame, but a cold, steady ember, waiting for the right breath of air to ignite. She began with a list, names, specific and deliberate, written in neat, legible ink on a page torn from her journal. But revenge, as Veronica saw it now, wouldn't be won with scandal or spectacle. It would be played slowly, piece by piece, detail by painstaking detail, on the grand chessboard of the city's social and business elite. She would hollow out her enemies, not with brute force, but with the meticulous skill of someone used to arranging fabrics and fortunes thread by delicate thread. The power of information. Her first move was to gather information, more than rumor, more than idle gossip. She needed leverage. The old Victoria had trusted and forgiven, but Veronica was methodical, unafraid to get her hands dirty if justice required it. She began frequenting charity brunches and midweek happy hours, all the small but critical gatherings where assistants and managers, emboldened by cocktails, let secrets slip. Through her new acquaintances, stylists, interior designers, tech consultants, She started building a web of informants, all oblivious to her real motives. She learned that Richard's latest investment firm was teetering, stretched thin by ambitious but reckless expansion. She discovered that Lila had developed a taste for risk, gambling increasingly large sums, not only on fashion ventures, but also in exclusive poker rooms, frequented by men who expected something more than conversation in return. The greatest asset proved to be Aaron Chu, a mild-mannered IT specialist who managed cybersecurity for several boutique firms, catering to the rich and discreet. Veronica had met Aaron months ago, sharing a table at a networking breakfast, where her insight into branding had impressed him. Over time, she nurtured a quiet alliance, always making clear she expected discretion, never asking for more than Aaron willingly offered. But now, her questions grew targeted. The structure of Richard's holding companies, the personal communications that disappeared so rapidly from his official phone. With Aaron's help, always carefully masked behind layers of plausible deniability, Veronica mapped Richard's empire from the inside out. She uncovered shell companies she'd never known existed, email chains containing not just business plans, but risky jokes, coded messages, and photographs that could only be described as compromising, setting the stage. Step by step, Veronica staged her return. She reached out to Miles under the pretense of considering him for a PR contract, knowing his ambition outweighed decent loyalty. The meeting was friendly, even flirtatious, but behind every question lurked a trap. She dangled subtle references to scandals she might or might not know, and let him reveal just enough to confirm his weaknesses, his resentment over lack of promotion, insider secrets he'd sold, and a desperate need for validation from LA's power brokers. Outside the office, Veronica was even more careful. She never moved in circles that would risk running into her past self's genuine friends. Those rare women, now few in number, who might recognize her, even beneath her new features. Instead, she cultivated connections among those seeking a leg up. Bloggers eager for a juicy tip, lobbyists with grudges against Richard's companies, and society photographers always in search of the next Cinderella story. With or without a happy ending, information was ammunition. She spent evenings documenting everything: passwords, receipts, travel records, and financial statements. For every target, she created a digital dossier, cross-referenced in encrypted folders across 3 hard drives. It was painstaking work, at once exhilarating and chilling. Some nights she questioned if she was going too far, but then she'd remember those devastating hours at her old mansion's front gate. Security guards blocking her path while her former husband grinned from above. First moves on the board. Having gathered her leverage, Veronica crafted her first gambits. Nothing flashy, nothing direct, just pressure in the right places. She began anonymously leaking select details about Richard's precarious financial deals to a business columnist known for cutting through corporate spin. A week later, news broke of an investigation into possible insider trading at Richard's company. The damage was not nuclear, but surgical. Investors panicked, analysts speculated, and Richard stopped sleeping soundly at night. Meanwhile, she orchestrated a subtle but devastating attack on Lila's carefully curated reputation. Through a network of fashion PR consultants, she arranged for a rival influencer to accidentally expose a series of Lila's misappropriations. Ideas lifted from small, independent designers who had previously trusted her. Within days, whispers multiplied. Lila Monroe, it turned out, had more than one skeleton in her well-organized, social media-ready closet.
Mine.
Sponsorships were quietly pulled,
Finally.
invitations revoked. Lila's star, so recently ascendant, began to dim. With Miles, the play was even more psychological. Veronica, accidentally, let slip in a conversation
I never said that.
with a junior reporter
You know how
that
your memory
someone
can be
in Richard's
sometimes.
inner circle had been quietly sabotaging him for months. Miles, the story went, was the mole under suspicion. Paranoia quickly set in. Miles' cryptic texts, questions from mutual contacts, gossip about his trustworthiness began to overwhelm him. He started reaching out to Veronica more frequently, first for reassurance, then for advice, and eventually for protection. All she needed to do was wait. No turning back. Every step was measured. Every risk weighed against the bitter thrill of justice. Veronica made sure to protect herself with layers of plausible deniability.
All right.
Always acting through
Send the
intermediaries,
report to my email
always
now.
masking her digital footprints.
We
But
finally
she
got
never
him.
relished her
I think the
victories
market
in
trend
public.
suggests a slight
This
downturn in the
was not
dollar.
about
Actually, the data
humiliating them
indicates a
the
stable
way they'd
quarter.
once
Your
humiliated
analysis
her.
seems slightly
It was about
misinformed.
leveling the ground, perhaps even tipping it back in her favor. She felt the power slowly shift as invitations came, opportunities arose, and the people who'd once ignored her opinions adjusted to her presence. Veronica noticed how her voice now cut through a room, how her handshake was no longer the grasp of a cast-off wife, but of a woman nobody dared dismiss. At night, she stared out the window of her downtown studio. The city sprawled out beneath, sharp and ruthless, but hers for the taking. The chessboard was set, her pawns and knights in position, her enemies uncertain which piece she would move next. The game of revenge was only beginning, and Veronica Hill was finally, quietly, in control. First blow, the city glimmered beneath a haze of late afternoon heat as Veronica prepared her first real offensive. Years of privilege had taught Richard the smell of money, but he'd forgotten the scent of fear. Veronica planned to reacquaint him with it, methodically, mercilessly, and in a way no public humiliation would ever let him recover from. She began, as always, with information. Her digital dossiers were cross-referenced and encrypted, the kind of labyrinth even Richard's best fixers couldn't penetrate if her identity was ever discovered. For days, she barely left her studio apartment, her face illuminated by flickers of code and spreadsheets that mapped Richard's empire, his offshore accounts, questionable subsidiaries, and a mirage of shell corporations established in tax havens. Every click
It's all right
brought
to be a
her
little messy
closer,
sometimes.
not just to justice, but to a reckoning. The move had to be calculated. Richard, despite his arrogance, was a seasoned player. He'd survived mergers, lawsuits, whisper campaigns. Veronica needed evidence irrefutable and shocking, not only enough to raise eyebrows, but enough to cause panic among his board of directors, rattle the stockholders, and capture the attention of regulatory authorities. She wasn't interested in petty rumors. She wanted headlines. She'd spent weeks cultivating an anonymous persona on the fringes of business forums and whisper networks, an insider who leaked just enough to establish credibility without drawing excessive suspicion. With Aaron Chu's help, Veronica composed a data packet full of redacted reports and sanitized financial statements detailing the round-tripping of funds between Richard's properties and several shell companies in the Caribbean. It was clean, damning, and nearly impossible to trace back to her. With the dossier complete, she selected her first channels carefully. The tip landed in the inbox of Sarah Villarreal, a notoriously ethical and stubborn financial journalist for a major West Coast publication. Sarah had a gift for cutting through the noise and a reputation for never backing down, even under extreme corporate pressure. The waiting was the worst part. For 3 days, Veronica couldn't sleep, her mind thundering with anticipation and worry. She wondered if Sarah's editors would be bought off, or if Richard's lawyers would bury the story before it saw the light of day. She forced herself to focus on work, mocking up new blazers for the fall collection. But every time she reached for her phone, her heart skipped. It broke on the 4th day. An early morning push notification lit up her screen. Veronica watched the chaos unfold from her sunlit corner studio. Each development, a small piece of long-awaited justice. Stock in Richard's firm plummeted. Television crews huddled outside its offices, while somber board members issued vague statements about internal audits and full cooperation with authorities. Commentators on Finance Talk shows dissected every detail. Client calls surged, some seeking clarification, others ready to bail. The impact was swift and devastating. Within 48 hours, Richard's legal team scrambled to draft public responses, spinning careless narratives of misunderstandings and administrative oversights. But the evidence was too substantial. Documents made public, insiders anonymously confirming the schemes, and an official preliminary investigation announced by a federal agency. Investors, once loyal to a fault, began placing frantic calls to other firms, eager to divest before the scandal became radioactive. Richard himself was caught flat-footed. For the first time in years, he wasn't orchestrating the moves, but reacting to them. Veronica imagined him in his marble-floored penthouse, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders, sweat beading beneath his $1,000 suit. Perhaps he sensed, in the sudden rush of panic, the presence of a nemesis whose reach he'd never imagined. But she didn't celebrate, not yet. The real victory was not in the headlines, but in the ripple effects. Lila Monroe, who'd built her social currency on being both Richard's muse and a burgeoning businesswoman, soon found her sponsorships suspended. Brands that had been eager to attach their names to her meticulously curated lifestyle now issued apologetic emails, citing a need for distance until matters are clarified. Her influencer deals evaporated overnight, and the bright calls from PR firms turned into stony silence. Veronica moved quickly to maintain her anonymity, communicating only via secure, encrypted channels with a few trusted allies. She knew that if Richard ever suspected her, he might try to retaliate, and she'd learned the hard way that his cruelty was as creative as it was cold. She reached out to Sarah Villarreal under the guise of the original anonymous source, thanking her for her integrity and encouraging her to keep digging. Meanwhile, Veronica carefully monitored the conversations happening at the edges of her new network. Boutique owners, minor socialites, and hungry creative directors. She noticed how quickly loyalty could shift in a city built on reputation and rumor. Some had called to gossip, circling as if to guess the identity of whoever had pulled the thread that was now unraveling wealth and power. Veronica kept her answers vague, her smiles enigmatic. She would not risk her disguise. Not now. Amy, always perceptive, was quick to decipher the new energy surrounding her friend. Over late-night glasses of wine, she asked, "Was it you?" Veronica didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was all the confirmation Amy needed. "It's not over, you know," Amy warned gently. "He'll fight back." Veronica nodded. "Let him. I'm not finished either." And so, the first blow landed. Not as a spectacle, but with the precision of a master strategist. The boardroom battles, the midnight scrambling of lawyers, the shift in how LA's elite uttered Richard's name, all were orchestral notes in the composition of Veronica's revenge. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a quiet celebration. She poured a glass of modest Cabernet, stepped onto her tiny balcony, and looked out over the city that had once watched her fall. The lights below sparkled not with indifference, but with possibility. Veronica was no longer a casualty of another person's ambition. She was a player, and the game had only just begun. Tables turned. For weeks after the financial scandal erupted, Los Angeles society thrummed with speculation. Veronica Hill's work was meticulous and slow-burning, a campaign of subtle moves that pushed her adversaries ever closer to the brink. On the surface, she maintained a facade of steady business growth, her fashion brand gaining traction, magazine features starting to appear, her circle of supporters quietly multiplying. Beneath, however, something far more calculated simmered. The city's social calendar moved on, but reputations did not recover so quickly. Richard's company staggered beneath the weight of investigations and lost investments, while Lila Monroe's sponsorships and magazine mentions dwindled, replaced by whispers of impropriety and creative theft. Yet Veronica knew her adversaries well. The truly ruthless rarely accept defeat. They look for cracks in the dam, desperate for something to leverage. She watched them squirm, but stayed vigilant, knowing the pivot point was near. A tempting bait, it was time to launch the second phase.
Who is she?
A reversal so deft, her rivals would never see it coming. Lila, hungry to restore her social clout and desperate for a comeback, was the perfect mark. Veronica, through an alias and a shell email account, introduced the VH Collective to Los Angeles' tastemakers, a new fashion tech startup promising AI-driven design, blockchain-certified exclusivity, and sustainability. The pitch glimmered with Silicon Valley promise, peppered with luxury credentials, and the right names dropped in just the right order. The idea was just plausible enough for a jaded influencer looking for a shortcut back to relevance. Soon enough, Lila's agent forwarded a message requesting a private meeting with the founders. Veronica assembled a team of actors and consultants, each sworn to NDAs, and fed a story about launching a highly confidential, disruptive brand. The staged office in a WeWork loft was all glass, brushed steel, and startup optimism. Lila arrived in her signature sunglasses and designer heels. Nervous but eager, she pored over prototype fabrics and interacted with a carefully coded AI fashion assistant. Veronica, cloaked in an unrecognizable voice and mannerisms, lured her deeper with influencers' jargon and visionary talk. By the end of their second meeting, Lila was pitching to invest. Anything for a slice of the next big thing. Anything to prove she still belonged. Veronica played the long game. Lila vaulted over the due diligence, signed an NDA packed with legal landmines, and wired her investment, her entire cushion, and then some, into the venture's carefully compartmentalized holding account. Within days, the startup vaporized. The website redirected to a cryptic message. The so-called founders disappeared, and Lila was left clutching a sheaf of angry, useless contracts. Her money was gone. Word spread in tight, influential circles. Lila Monroe had been played, and played hard. The sharks she'd tried to swim with turned away. Her most loyal friends suddenly unavailable, sowing doubt in Richard's court. At the same time, Veronica turned her gaze to Richard's crumbling inner circle. She knew from Aaron Chu's digital sleuthing that panic was spreading. As investigations deepened, employees scrambled to secure their own futures. Veronica focused on Miles Henderson, Richard's erstwhile assistant, the same Miles who in better days had orchestrated her humiliating exit and leaked damaging stories to the tabloids. Miles had long harbored ambitions of power that outpaced his abilities, and now pressure was mounting on him from all sides. A seemingly anonymous email arrived in his inbox, offering a way out that came with a simple demand: full disclosure of everything he'd done under Richard's orders. The email used language only someone close to the inner circle would know. A calculated blend of threat and rescue. With mounting anxiety, Miles scheduled a meeting at a little-used coffee shop where a legal consultant, one of Amy's trusted former colleagues, met him. Mildly sweating and desperate, Miles confessed to doctored spreadsheets, false wire transfers, and even the orchestration of Victoria's asset transfer, all done on Richard's explicit orders, all with proof buried in servers and cloud accounts. The confession was quietly recorded, banked securely in Amy's arsenal. Now, Veronica not only had documentation of Richard's crimes, but also a vocal witness who would flip if pressured. The realignment of power. Veronica was careful, keeping every move separate, every document and asset untouchable, except by her most trusted allies. Her plan was not about public fireworks or a spectacular downfall. Instead, it was the slow, inexorable crumbling of her enemies' worlds, piece by piece, support by support. She wanted them to experience what she had known: powerlessness, isolation, and the withering knowledge that there would be no rescue. Soon, word trickled through industry parties that Richard was liquidating assets at a loss. Investors distanced themselves, anxious about legal exposure. Partners renegotiated or simply walked away. The board of directors replaced their lawyers, and internal memos, leaked of course, revealed a growing mutiny. Richard bulldozed his way through meetings, increasingly erratic, the distance between him and his last moments of triumph shrinking rapidly. For Lila, the spiral was even more abrupt. Without money, without brands, and alienated from the city's trendsetters, she became a cautionary tale. The lavish parties stopped, the invitations dried up, and even her Instagram posts drew snide, unforgiving comments. Her world, once curated and shining, now existed in shadows and whispers. Veronica's new rules. For the first time since returning to Los Angeles, Veronica allowed herself longer moments of satisfaction. She didn't gloat. There was too much to lose. But each night, she reviewed her progress. A spreadsheet of debts collected, dignity restored. She moved through the city with quiet confidence, finding that respect had begun to attach to her name in the right places. New designers courted her opinion. Editors, skeptical at first, now looked to publish her thoughts on industry disruption. And yet, Veronica never lost sight of why she fought. It wasn't just to punish those who had taken everything from her. It was to show herself, and, by proxy, every silent woman erased by the whims of power, that no one was truly powerless once they shed their fear. She met regularly with Amy, who became both counsel and confessor, helping to strategize the legal and social steps still to come. Together, they built not just a case against Richard and his cronies, but the architecture for a new life that didn't rely on old patterns or anyone else's permission. Final moves in play. As autumn deepened, the chessboard had shifted. Richard and Lila, once glimmering at the top, now occupied shrinking islands surrounded by sharks. And all the while, rumors circulated about the mysterious new power broker in LA fashion, a woman who had emerged from nowhere, seemingly immune to scandal and fueled by a steely purpose nameless to most. Veronica watched and waited, knowing that the next confrontation would be public, final, and on her terms. She was no longer prey, nor merely a player. She had become the architect of the game, and the tables, once set against her, had finally completely turned. Final confrontation. The fall air in Los Angeles shimmered with the edge of change. No longer the sun-baked haze of summer, but a bold clarity that stripped the world of its illusions. For months, the city's elite had been rocked by scandal after scandal, dissolving fortunes, vanished influencers, and a palpable shift in who held the power behind every closed door. At the heart of this quiet storm, one figure remained cloaked in mystery, spoken of in hushed, curious tones, from cocktail parties to boardrooms. Veronica Hill had become an enigma, her origins speculated, and her ascent the subject of theories spun by those desperate to reclaim control. But in one suite of a failing penthouse high above Wilshire, Richard finally understood. His business empire, gutted by federal probes and deserted by former allies, was a mere skeleton of its former might. Legal fees bled him dry. The press hounded him as if for blood. His new companion, Lila Monroe, had retreated into isolation, avoiding both camera flashes and old friends. The name Victoria Clark haunted him now, not as the brittle socialite he once controlled, but as a ghost reshaping his world from the shadows. The moment of reckoning approached, not with fanfare, but with an embossed invitation. Richard was still listed as a patron for the annual Winter Gala, one of the few doors not yet slammed in his face. And the city's old guard, ever more desperate to project normalcy, had not dared strike him from the list. The event was to be held at the Andromeda, a landmark hotel draped in crystal and velvet, where the desperate rich mingled beneath the illusion of stability. This year, however, the promise of a mysterious new benefactor electrified every conversation. The gala, crossing paths, the ballroom sparkled with tension. Veronica made her entrance with intent, accompanied by Amy, each step measured and unhurried.
Thank you. We'll take it from
Her
here.
presence was unmistakable, classic, poised, unrecognizable to all but the ghosts of her former life.
I agree.
The low buzz
see how
of
long we can keep it
speculation
up.
swelled as she greeted hosts, editors, and boutique owners, her bearing confident, her laughter low and steady. To the city's high society, she was now Ms. Hill, her reputation shrouded in respect, awe, and a hint of caution. Richard arrived late, flanked by a depleted entourage. He looked older, drawn and restless, scanning the crowd with the twitchy paranoia of a hunted animal. Whispers trailed in his wake, the kind that clung, never flattering, always fatal. Veronica watched him circle the room, a fated king desperate to reassert his place. He did not see her until she stepped into the heart of the crowd, where the main benefactors were to be acknowledged. The gala director smiled from the stage, her voice ringing across the crowd. And now, it is my honor to introduce our newest benefactor, whose generosity has carried us through the most turbulent of years. Please, Miss Hill. The room stilled. Veronica walked forward, her name echoing in 100 minds. She took the microphone with calm authority. Thank you. I'm honored to support this community, where resilience and vision matter more than privilege, and where true change begins when we recognize that every ending is also a beginning. A murmur rolled through the room. Richard's jaw tightened. Lila, seated several tables away, paled as suspicions collided with memory. But Veronica's poise never faltered. The twist revealed. After the speeches, Richard pressed through the crowd, hunger and dread warring in his eyes. Miss Hill, he croaked, as if the words tasted strange. He studied her sharper cheekbones, the new hair, every trace of luxury and resolve. Something clicked, and his face drained of color. Victoria? His voice cracked, almost imperceptibly. She allowed herself a measured smile. It's been a long time, Richard. He stepped back, breath shallow. You, how? His voice failed. Guests nearby, sensing a storm, edged away. Veronica's words were quiet but razor sharp. You spent so long teaching me that power meant erasing others. But the truth is, power comes from surviving what you thought would destroy me. He reached out, desperation flaring in his eyes. No longer the polished predator, but a man cornered. Victoria, we can fix this. Help me. They'll ruin me. You have to understand. Everything is falling apart. Is it? Veronica's eyes were cold, unsparing. You burned the bridges yourself, Richard. You stole my life. You paraded my misery for the world. And when I was nothing, you expected me to crawl. He shook his head, voice pleading. Don't do this. Don't make me beg. For everything we built, what we built, died the moment you had me dragged from our home. You taught me that mercy is wasted on the merciless. If you want forgiveness, you'll have to find it elsewhere. Amy approached then, a silent pillar at Veronica's side. Her presence was a warning. This woman was no longer alone, no longer vulnerable. Richard's face crumpled, not from rage, but from the shock of true defeat. Around them, eyes darted and camera persons raised phones, hungry for scandal. Veronica turned away, addressing the onlookers with a serenity tempered in fire. There's nothing here worth watching, she announced. Just history, finally settling its accounts. A new order. In that moment, the old power dynamic died. Richard's pleading formed no echo in the marble-lined hall. Lila, exposed and isolated, slipped quietly toward the elevator, her reign over Instagram's empire already irrelevant. Veronica and Amy crossed the ballroom as equals, pausing only to greet the dignitaries, who now saw Veronica not as tabloid fodder, but as a force in her own right. It was not triumph, as the world dreams of it. No standing ovation, no cinematic applause. It was deeper, the sense of justice restored, of a narrative seized back at last. Later, on a balcony overlooking the city's glittering avenues, Amy offered a quiet toast to starting over, not as survivors, but as authors. Veronica sipped, her heart no longer raw, but rooted, and to making sure no one else gets written out again. Below them, Los Angeles continued its endless reinvention, with her past finally exercised in front of those who had once watched her fall. Veronica felt the first breath of real freedom. She was no longer Richard's discarded wife, nor the city's latest scandal. In one irreversible night, she had become her own reckoning. The confrontation had not ended in a scene, but in a reckoning only those who have truly lost and fought to reclaim themselves can understand. And as the night deepened, the world seemed to tilt ever so slightly, this time in her favor. Phoenix rising. The days after the gala dawned bright and unburdened, Los Angeles bathed in the brisk clarity of autumn. For the first time in years, Veronica Hill woke not as a fugitive from her past, but as a free woman, her scars transformed into ribbons of purpose. The city's languid opulence no longer frightened her. It was merely a backdrop to her own narrative, not a gilded cage. Headlines framed her differently now. From socialite to self-made power broker, the mysterious rise of Ms. Hill. Panel hosts on television debated her origins and motives, while online forums speculated endlessly about her reinvention. Had she been the architect of Richard's undoing? Was her ascent a fluke or a feat of relentless ambition? The rumors no longer bothered her. They were simply proof that she existed beyond erasure. A new creed, no going back. Veronica's days took on an exhilarating rhythm. She managed her growing fashion enterprise, with a confidence sharpened by trial. Gone were the anxieties over bills or the fear of an empty apartment. Now she reveled in the letters from small-town designers seeking mentorship, the city contracts that arrived with her name at the top, and the investors who treated her as a peer. Her workspace was still modest, but now it pulsed with purpose. Seamstresses laughing over lunch, young interns brainstorming eco-friendly designs, collaborators spanning from tech to textile, always challenging her to push bolder, think wider. She found joy in mentorship, especially with women who'd once accepted invisibility as their fate. Over coffee or after board meetings, Veronica told her story, adding no gloss, omitting neither the agony of betrayal nor the glimmers of hope. She opened her inbox to cold emails from single mothers, first-generation college students, and closet dreamers. She read each one, often responding late into the night, determined that no genuine voice would go ignored. Everywhere she spoke, Veronica repeated the same creed. You are never invisible unless you accept someone else's definition of your worth. Unlike the empty mantras offered at charity luncheons past, her words rang with the iron of lived truth, and women listened, naysayers, critics, and the meaning of power. Of course, there were those who sniped from the shadows, old acquaintances who dismissed her as lucky or hinted that she wielded vengeance more than vision. But Veronica learned to brush off these voices.
Evidence is clear.
Once, their judgment would have cut her deeply. Now, she saw it for what it was, fear masquerading as cynicism. They whispered because, for the first time, she'd proven a woman could survive public ruin and shape her own future without permission. When forums and blogs published biting op-eds or tried to label Veronica a cold-hearted schemer, she responded not with counterattacks, but with transparency. She sat for interviews with journalists she respected and shared not just her successes, but the loneliness, the therapy, and the nights haunted by doubt. The truth is, she told one interviewer in a widely shared podcast, my ruin forced me to decide. Was I the victim of someone else's ambition, or would I become the protagonist of my own story? The answer, she realized, had never been in exacting revenge, but in claiming her freedom, one painful, intentional step at a time. A rose among the ashes. Autumn passed in a whirl of fashion debuts, workshops on sustainable leadership, and panels about women's futures in business. Veronica rarely thought of Richard or Lila anymore, except as punctuation marks in a much longer, richer story. One clear evening, standing backstage as her namesake collection was set to debut at a downtown show, Veronica looked out at the audience, designers, students, and, strikingly, dozens of women she'd mentored or befriended during her climb back up. The air vibrated with the same hope and hunger she'd once felt alone in her small apartment. Before walking out, Amy squeezed her arm gently. You didn't just survive, Vic. You built something for everyone who was ever counted out. Veronica smiled, her eyes shining. Not with glitz, but with gratitude. She stepped onto the runway's edge, speaking briefly before the first model took to the stage. Tonight isn't a celebration of me, she began, voice steady. It's a tribute to every woman who ever woke up believing her story was over and who decided to write a new chapter. As applause echoed, Veronica felt the circle close, not in an ending, but in bloom, seeds of a new beginning. Her public profile soared, but Veronica was careful not to lose herself in celebrity. Success, she'd learned, was only meaningful if it created branches for others to rise. She funded scholarships, launched community sewing studios, and kept her door, figuratively and literally, open. Late one afternoon, As golden light streamed across her desk, a
Did
knock
they catch
sounded
the
at her
Batman?
office. A young woman, wide-eyed, nervous, clutching a battered notebook, stepped inside. I hope this isn't a bad time. I read your interview and I need to know how you started over, how you weren't afraid. Veronica smiled, memory stirring. Everyone's afraid. The difference is whether you let the fear guide you or push you to fight back. The girl nodded, hope kindling in her posture. Will you teach me? Yes, Veronica said, gesturing for her to sit. And then you'll teach someone else. The conversation stretched into evening, ideas and laughter mingling as dusk grayed the city. Veronica realized this. More than any runway or headline was the true measure of her phoenix rise. The quiet moments where one woman's courage sparked another's, and the cycle of silence finally broke. Freedom, authorship, and tomorrow's blossoms. As night descended, Veronica walked home through LA's humming streets. Flowers, roses, sent by admirers or anonymous cheerleaders, lined her doorstep. She plucked one, smiling at the symbolism. Beauty grown from struggle, petals opening toward hope. She paused on her balcony, the city sprawling at her feet, and allowed herself one last look back, not in regret, but acknowledgement. The ashes of her former life shimmered far below, faint and powerless against the constellation of new beginnings blazing above. This was her liberation, her rebirth, not as someone restored to a pedestal, but as a gardener of futures. The world saw a phoenix. Veronica felt every scar anchor her in hard-earned joy and conviction. From here, every chapter was hers to write, and as dawn hinted from the east, Veronica Hill, once erased, now unforgettable, welcomed freedom, thorns, and all, aftershocks and hope, epilogue. Months had passed since the night Veronica Hill claimed her final victory, not just for herself, but for every shadowed voice once drowned out by the roar of other people's power. With each passing day, the aftershocks of her comeback rippled outward, changing Los Angeles in ways that reached beyond scandal or headlines. The press, once relentless in their hunger for drama, had shifted their gaze. Headlines no longer gaped open with words like fallen or disgraced. Instead, they built new narratives. The woman who changed the game. How Veronica Hill sparked a new kind of power in Hollywood. A phoenix rises and lifts others with her. Her story was dissected in business schools, featured in podcasts for aspiring entrepreneurs, and even fictionalized in TV pilots that never quite captured the rawness of reality. But to Veronica, the greatest changes were the quiet ones, moments when hope displaced cynicism, and second chances became more than a whispered dream. Echoes in the city. From atop her rooftop garden, Veronica watched the city that had once exiled her now hum with possibility. The skyline, lit by the promise of dusk, felt less like the boundary of her world and more like an open horizon. Where she once hid in back offices, she now sat on panels and workshops about resilience, reinvention, and ethical leadership.
The timeline is wrong.
Clients and partners from every background sought her advice. Not just about fashion or branding, but about rebuilding reputations, surviving public shame, and trusting again. Her own life had become a mosaic of these encounters. The single father pitching a sustainable clothing line, the retired actress launching a support network for women starting over after divorce, the seamstress who, inspired by Veronica's generosity, opened her own tiny workshop on the edge of Koreatown. Veronica greeted them not as an icon, but as a fellow survivor. Every new season, she told her listeners, gives us the chance to bloom differently. Justice, not vengeance. Meanwhile, The remnants of her old adversaries settled further into the periphery. Richard's empire never recovered from the blow. A drawn-out bankruptcy left his name synonymous with hubris. He retreated from public life, selling off penthouses and artwork, living out the remainder of his relevance as a cautionary tale. Once, Veronica might have gazed toward his ruin with triumph. Now, she simply wished him peace and distance. Lila Monroe's flame sputtered and snuffed. She chased reality TV deals for a time, but the city's appetite for her drama waned. Rumors sometimes floated to Veronica, sightings of Lila in the desert, working low-profile PR jobs, returning to the anonymity she'd once trampled on her way up. Veronica never reached out. Compassion wasn't the same as forgetting, and forgiveness did not mean erasure. Miles, whose trembling deposition had helped open the doors to Richard's secret crimes, had built a quieter life in San Diego, working with nonprofits now, sending the occasional thank you card. "You saved my conscience," he'd written. "Not everyone would have given me the chance to come clean." Veronica kept that card on a bulletin board by her desk, a reminder that justice was never about spectacle, but about restoring the balance. A legacy in motion. If Veronica had feared irrelevance after the storm, she needn't have worried. The foundation she launched. She hired women from backgrounds as diverse as their resumes. An ex-banker turned therapist, a coding instructor, a former magazine editor who had experienced her own tabloid apocalypse. Together, they rebuilt lives from ashes. No two stories the same. On weekends, her compact garden apartment bloomed with activity. Tea shared on patchwork couches, impromptu pitch sessions at midnight, spontaneous game nights that erased class and background. Veronica's beloved roses, first planted during the loneliest days of her exile, now crowned every windowsill in town, gifted to each graduate from the fund as a symbol that beauty and resilience were not mutually exclusive. The Phoenix Fund flourished. Its mission was simple: provide legal counsel, emergency housing, and seed funding for women blindsided by betrayal, divorce, or abrupt job loss. The waiting list for mentorships and microgrants stretched longer by the week. A new generation steps forward. One damp evening in early spring, as rain whispered on the rooftop, Veronica prepared to lock up when a hesitant knock sounded on her studio door. A young woman, no more than 20, her clothes mismatched, but eyes bright with defiance, stood there, clutching a half-shredded notebook. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hill. I came because I don't know who else to ask. They say you help people start over. I need to know how, because I just can't do it alone." Veronica motioned her inside and made tea, resisting the urge to offer platitudes. Instead, she listened as the girl poured out her story. An inheritance squandered by a relative, eviction looming, dreams of a design career dissolving in the mire of her circumstances. Veronica recognized herself in the girl's stifled anger and raw hope. When the girl finished, Veronica spoke softly but firmly. "You're not alone. None of us are if we choose to reach out. What you need most and what you fear are often the same thing: to try again in the light with your own name." Together, they outlined a plan, a resume, an application for a grant, 3 phone calls to colleagues who might know someone hiring. It wasn't magic, but it was a start. By midnight, the girl's posture had changed. She left smiling, a single rose in hand, the promise of something new taking root beneath the city's neon glow. A world that remembers. As spring blossomed, Veronica found herself inundated with invitations from universities, think tanks, and social impact awards committees. She spoke not of revenge, but of rising, the measure of a life she told one audience, is not what you lose, but what you dare to become once you're broken open. Amy, ever the steadfast friend, remained her confidant. Sometimes, during their late-night wine sessions, Amy would laugh. You realize you're a legend now, right? Veronica would smile and shake her head. I'm just proof that the story never ends where others want it to. Hope moves forward. The old wounds never vanished,
The victim's
but they
family
no
needs
longer
closure.
defined her. Instead,
get it for
her
them.
story wove itself into the
Just
DNA
breathe.
of a city hungry for transformation. Young women left secret notes on her office door. Thank you for not forgetting us. While former enemies sometimes sent silent letters of congratulations, an implicit acknowledgement that the cycle of harm could be broken. On the first night of summer, Veronica stood barefoot in her rooftop garden as fireworks popped over downtown. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The scent of earth and open air filling her lungs. The aftershocks had faded into something else, a steady, bright pulse of hope. For every woman erased, silenced, or betrayed, she had become a beacon. The world might never stop trying to write some people out, but as long as there were voices willing to begin again, there would always
You're
be a
doing
next
wonderful,
chapter.
sweetie.
And so Veronica Hill turned to
Try
face
adding
the
a little
future,
more yellow right here.
her hands dirt-stained, her heart fierce with
Behind me,
possibility,
the vibrant
and the
colors of
city's
this community
endless lights
center
blooming
hide
beneath her.
much darker
A
secret.
gardener, a phoenix, and above all, a living promise that hope, once kindled, could survive anything.